frightened community. And we control pretty much the entire industry. Zadok's studio was about the only studio not run by Jews. As a matter of fact, they called it the Goy studio. And then the war comes and everything changes. And with the end of the war, American movie makers are saying, we have this vehicle called cinema. We are going to use it to tell important social messages. Which film wins the Academy Award in 1946, right after the war? It's a film called The Best Years of Our Lives. What is it about? It's about returning soldiers, returning GIs, and their difficulty in coming home and readjusting. Important film, an important message. And that same year, Laura Z. Hobson's novel comes out. It's called Gentleman's Agreement. And it's a novel about social anti-Semitism. Does it get made into a film? Every single Jewish producer in Hollywood passes. And again, Darryl F. Zanuck steps forward and he buys the rights. Now, it's after the war. We've just defeated fascism. We know about the Holocaust. We're afraid to deal with anti-Semitism? Well, yes, actually we are. Because when I looked at the statistics and the demographics and the studies that were done before World War II and after World War II in this country, you find that the level of anti-Semitism before World War II was quite high. The Germans had done their job, the Nazi Bund was doing its job, the American Nazi Bund. Anti-Semitism was high into the beginning of the war. And in the beginning of the war, you may remember reading that some people thought that we were only fighting because our president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as he was called, was doing it for the Jews. After the war, anti-Semitism is at the same high rate. It's crazy. You would think just the opposite. So I can't fault necessarily these filmmakers who said, if we tackle this subject, it's going to cause more problems. But Zanuck didn't care. And this time he was taken on by not only the industry, there was a famous meeting in the back lot of Warner Brothers studio where every single producer in Hollywood got together to try and tell Zanuck that if he made the film, it would never get distributed. The Anti-Defamation League, and don't get me wrong, it's a great organization. Some of my best friends even work there. The American Jewish Committee, another wonderful organization. They did everything in their power to try and stop the making of this film. But again, it took that non-Jew to have the courage to make this film. The film goes on to win the Oscar for Best Motion Picture of 1947. And to Anti-Defamation League's credit, they decided finally, when the film was made, to bring in sociologists and social scientists to track the impact that this film and another film made at RKO Studio called Crossfire, also dealing with anti-Semitism, the effect, the impact that these films had on anti-Semitic feelings in this country. And they watched that they dramatically changed and lowered anti-Semitism from 1947 through 1950. Films can impact. We learned it then. What I want you to see now is a clip from Gentleman's Agreement, and as you're watching it, one of the things I love to do is to use film as text for understanding and seeing things. In The Jazz Singer, you may remember classically when the president of the synagogue holds up the talit. It's a statement, it's a visual, powerful visual, and then he brings him. In other words, take the mantle. Come home to your people. We're here. And as we're watching this clip from Gentleman's Agreement, pay close attention. Because what we're going to see is the hero, Gregory Peck, playing the part of Philip Green, who has a hotel reservation up in New Hampshire. And he is a journalist. He's come to New York and he's asked to write a story about anti-Semitism by his journal, by his paper. He doesn't really know how to handle this. Does he just look at the statistics? Does he interview people? Then he realizes the best thing to do is to pretend that he himself is a Jew so that he will experience what it is to be a Jew. And in this scene, he wants to see. He has a reservation. He wants to see, in fact, how welcome he will be. Gentleman's Agreement, 1947.
Would you excuse me, Lord, please?
How do you do, Mr. Green?
How do you do?
In answer to your question, may I inquire, are you, that is, do you follow the Hebrew religion yourself, or is it that you just want to make sure?
I've asked a simple question and I can have a simple answer.
You see, we do have a very high-class clientele, and well, naturally,
Then you do restrict your gifts to gentlemen.
well, I would say that, Mr. Green. In any event, there seems to be some mistake, but we don't have a free room in the entire hotel.
Oh.
But if you'd like, perhaps I could fix you over to the Brewster Hotel down near the station.
I'm not staying at the Brewster. Look, I'm Jewish and you don't take Jews. That's it, isn't it?
I never said that.
If you don't accept Jews, say so.
Don't raise your voice to me, Mr. Green. Speak a little more quietly, please.
Do you or don't you?
Mr. Green, I'm a very busy man. Now, if you want me to phone for a cab or room at the Brewster, I'll do so. Otherwise,
Otherwise, what?
First thing we see people on horseback carrying their tennis rackets. We're up in the country. And we see this car coming around the crescent. Who's coming? The outsider. Elia Kazan, the brilliant Greek-American film director and stage director, made this film, and he himself, as a Greek-American and very dark, Semitic-looking, experienced anti-Semitism as a child. And what he wanted to show is how the outsider is made to feel when they come inside. So, in a certain sense, this hotel represents America. Anybody notice the doors? Were they closed? Were they revolving? They're wide open. It's 1947. America has just liberated the world, and America is open to everyone. Or is it? And of course, the experience of going in and asking the question and finally realizing that he's too loud, catch that? And he looks down and his bags are already out the door. So you can feel that anti-Semitism is real. And Kazan does a brilliant job in taking Moss Hart's screenplay and turning it into film. But shortly after this film and the other film about anti-Semitism, Crossfire, were released, something happens in the United States. It is a committee of the House of Representatives, which famously had the initials HUAC, the House on American Activities Committee. And this committee began to investigate communism and the influence of communists on the film industry, in particular the social messages that filmmakers were putting forward. These communist messages. And famously, many Jews were found to have sympathies, to have signed petitions, to have been members of the Communist Party at certain times to try and make American life better for workers, for individuals. They're forced to testify and to give names. Some of them refused, most famously the Hollywood 10. 6 of them were Jews. And Hollywood begins to get a bit frightened. So here you have an industry largely controlled by Jews, and there is a fear of communism within that industry. Why should Jews be frightened? Well, where do most Jews come from? What country? How many of you have your ancestors from Russia? We became frightened. My own father came here when he was 3 from Russia. And I must tell you, as a child, he would almost weekly remind me that if anybody asked where your father was born, just tell them Philadelphia. It was real. I'd like to show you a clip from a film called Trumbo that came out just a few years ago. And I think it makes an important statement. So not only were these people in the industry, whether they were actors like Zero Mostel, or directors like Edward Dmytryk and others, or writers and so on, but the producers themselves were under a lot of pressure. They were being told that if they didn't blacklist these people, they themselves would be scrutinized. The film is called Trumbo, and this is a meeting between Hedda Hopper, the famous columnist, and Louis B. Mayer, one of the great Hollywood studio heads. The film Trumbo, you will recognize certainly the woman playing Hedda.
thought we knew everything.
We did.
No, not me. No, I didn't realize how much I loved it all until I reached a certain age and the roads started drying up. I remember thinking, now what do you do when you love something, but it stops loving you back?
You fight.
No. You love it more till it surrenders.
You never left them, Gina, with my heart.
Your boy,
Fine.
still in the name?
Yes, he's first lieutenant.
You raised a real hero.
Which is why I would like to tell him that we are doing as much for this country as he is.
It's complicated. Trumbull, the others, all have contracts.
L.B. You helped build this business, as did I. We're not going to watch these pissants defile it.
I'm running the studio here, Hedda. You think I love every person on my payroll? Grow up.
And how about I make it crystal clear to my 35 million readers exactly who runs Hollywood and won't fire these traitors? How about I name names, real names? Jacob Werner, Jack Warner, Shmuel Gelbfish, Sam Goldman, and of course yours, Lazar Melia.
You watch what you say to me.
40 years ago, you were starving in some shtetl. The greatest country on earth takes you in, gives you wealth, power, but the second we need you, you do nothing. And that's exactly what my readers expect from a business run by kikes.
Get out.
You know, Elby, I am fond of you. Some of my happiest years were spent on this lot. Not in your office, of course. You were always trying to fuck me on the couch. Me trying to maintain my virtue. Barely. But times change. Now I'd happily fuck you.
Mince no words. We forget that after World War II, shortly thereafter, within a year and a half, we are fighting another war. It's the Cold War. And this whole issue of where Jews fit in. Problematic. So here we've defeated fascism and we are again feeling this tension. And Jews are not willing to step forward. It's interesting that there were a number of novels and stories that were written at this time that do not make it into films because they're either too Jewish or too problematic. The Holocaust is a subject that the filmmakers are scared to touch. Israel, subjects that Jews want to stay away from because they are simply too scared. And then there's McCarthy. And then there's the execution of two Jewish individuals, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, accused of being traitors. Executions of Jews who are traitors because they're giving secrets to Russia. Maybe all Jews are suspect. This is a tough period for American Jewry. And then something special happens. We don't really give it enough credit, I think. There's a case before the Supreme Court that's being dealt with. It's called Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. We all learn about it in high school. We learn about it because it deals with segregation and desegregation in the public school systems. But we don't pay enough attention to it. It's an important case, not just for African Americans, but also for all minorities and for Jews. In 1953, the court was about to render a decision. It was going to be split 6-3 when the Chief Justice Vinson, dies of a heart attack. And they pushed the case aside, waiting to see who's going to be the new Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So Dwight Eisenhower brings in this conservative governor from California, a guy who had been involved in actually locking up Japanese Americans during World War II, the perfect candidate, winds up being one of our most liberal justices. And the Warren Court begins looking at this case in 1954. Warren brings together the justices, and he looks around the table and he says, "Gentlemen," and they were all gentlemen, "Gentlemen, I understand we are split. I want to somehow make this a unanimous decision. How do we do that?" And then he said, "Who is supposed to write the majority decision?" And a hand goes up in the corner. It's Justice Felix Frankfurter, the lone Jew on the court. And he looks at Frankfurter and he says, "Mr. Frankfurter, you're a Jew. I don't want you to write this decision. I want it to come from all of us." And they sat down, and the decision finally comes out. It is 9-0, with Chief Justice Warren himself writing the decision. What that did that very day was it said to all minorities that the Supreme Court is saying that separate but equal is no longer acceptable in the United States of America. And the next year, a woman by the name of Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat in Montgomery, Alabama on a public bus. A year-long strike ensues. The court then has to decide that. Can there be separate but equal or segregation on a public bus? And then many historians look at that as the beginning of the civil rights movement, in which, strangely, Jews get heavily involved. Why is that? Well, we care in social justice, but it's also about us. We forget that. In 1957, 9 black children are supposed to go into an all-white high school in Little Rock, Arkansas. They are blocked by the governor and the National Guard that he brings out. The court has decided that they need to go to school there, and the governor says it's a safety risk. It's a security issue. Well, this time the press is there. The cameras are rolling. And President Dwight Eisenhower has to make a decision. Politically, it's a very bad decision. He needs the South. He needs their support. But the Supreme Court has ruled, and according to our Constitution, it is the role of the executive branch to enforce those rulings. Now, any of you who follow history, American history, know that there have been presidents who've decided not to follow. Talking about the past. Who've decided not to follow that. Eisenhower calls Governor Phobos. They try and strike a deal. The next day the kids come to school. The next day they are blocked. Eisenhower gets on national television and he announces that he is nationalizing the Arkansas Guard as Commander-in-Chief of the United States. And if you don't get it, I'm sending in the 101st Airborne Division to make sure that these 9 black kids go to school. We, America's Jews, paid close attention. Because in 1954, the court made a ruling, but in 1957, the President of the United States guaranteed that ruling. And I have to tell you, that very day we stood a bit taller. And movie makers became less frightened. All of these film projects that had been pushed aside suddenly begin to appear. A 1945 novel by Irwin Shaw called The Young Lions gets made in 1958. And I'd like to show you a scene from that film which I think tells us a great deal of what's happening in the country. The actors are Montgomery Clift, Marlon Brando, Dean Martin. In this particular scene, Montgomery Clift plays a Jewish boy who falls in love with a non-Jewish woman. They're in love. They want to get married. And she says to him, okay, but you've got to meet Dad. So he gets on a bus and he comes to Vermont to meet Dad. Let's take a look. Montgomery Clift, The Young Lions. Again, please pay attention to the visuals and the sounds.
Well, it's one of the hazards you run when you never love it. One day she's going to come to you and say, I love you. I want to marry you.
That's one of the hazards.
She hasn't told me anything about this man at all.
Oh, he's gentle and he's clever. He's not just a man, he's a boy.
And poor.
And poor. He writes me a letter a day, even when we see each other in New York every night. And he's alone. He's Jewish, Father. Father, this is Noah.
How do we do?
How do you sing?
Well, seems to me that Mr. Ackerman and I might have a little talk. Secrecy. Why don't you finish your coffee, Hope? We won't be very long. That's Jack Marshall's. I went to school with his father. My father with his father. Virgil Smith's law office. One of his people did the legal work when they incorporated this town. 1750.
Looks like it's gonna be a nice day.
It's a family plot. 7 generations of plumbers there. Hope's mother, too. There's a school.
Mr. Plummer, I don't have a family plot. I don't have a family. I earn $35 a week, and I want to aim the draft. But I love Hope, and I shall love her for all my life.
You're doing an awful thing. Putting a man to the test of his principles. I wish to heaven you'd turn around and get on that bus and never see Hope again. But you won't do that. Will you? Didn't think you would. Anybody from town asked to marry Hope, I'd say, come on out the house. We got turkey for dinner. I never knew what you were before. You go along all your life, thinking a certain way. Someone jolts you. You have to look inside yourself. That's what you made me do, and I'm not hungry for it.
Who's the actress, anybody? Hope Lang, playing Hope. My niece went to a school in Providence, Rhode Island in the 90s. And her first day in the dorm, her dorm mate came up to her and said, "Your last name's Goldman?" And she goes, "Yes." And she began to feel her forehead. Small school, Brown University. Child was from Vermont, had never met a Jew before. Happened to you too? I can imagine it's happened to a few. Where are the horns?
Right.
First thing we hear, what's the very first thing we hear in this sequence? Church bells. Why do you think that director Edward Dmytryk has the church bells? He wants us to understand that Noah Ackerman, who's coming on that bus from New York City, is now in Christian America. You know, sitting in the metropolitan area, it's often you forget. When I was in college, I took a road trip across the West, found myself in western Texas, and learned that the rest of the country is not necessarily like metropolitan New York or Philadelphia. Christian America. And what Dmytryk, by the way, Dmytryk was grew up in an anti-Semitic home. He was a Polish Catholic and probably the most pro-Semitic film director of that period. What Dmytryk wants us to understand is, again, like we saw in Gentleman's Agreement, the outsider coming in. And the question is, will he be accepted? And in